Well, we heard from Brian Tamaki this morning, and I think anyone who's got any awareness of online and how online works knows that the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, the wide misreporting of that in its wake, particularly in mainstream media, the almost zero reporting of a massive march in Britain, and the participation of Brian Tamaki, who we spoke to this morning about this, all points to something of a watershed moment in those culture wars that the left said were never happening and then were just imported. But something is up. But still many issues, and I'm not going to call them the hard right, the far right, the Nazis, and I think we've got to have a new, more encompassing term. And I think small c conservative works, or traditionalism. Traditionalists. Conservative traditionalists. I try and say that without any prejudice to it or bias to it. Seem to me to be in an ascendancy over the woke nutters at the moment. But there are still some issues, particularly around the transgender issue, that this country, New Zealand, still needs to address. One of them is the rate at which and the protocols around the prescribing of puberty blockers in New Zealand to gender dysphoric, i.e. mentally unwell children or children who have been unduly influenced by their Munchausen by proxy parents. Joining to discuss the government's continued inaction on this and what's happening in the world is Bob McCoskrie from Family First. Bob, lovely to see you again. How are you, mate?
Morning, Sean. Good to be with you.
Look, we had Matt Ducey, the minister we thought was responsible for making a call on the puberty blockers on with Leah, I think it was last week. And he tried to flick past this issue that he's been sitting on for months to Simeon Brown. Where are we at on a set of protocols that align with the rest of the world now on puberty blockers?
Well, the problem is that New Zealand is out of step with the rest of the world because you've had the Cass report out of the UK, you've had liberal countries like Sweden, Finland, Norway, who have all been, quite liberal on this issue, and now they're pulling back on it. You had the recent HHS report that came out of the US, which also highlighted all the concerns. But even here in New Zealand, Sean, the Ministry of Health put out an evidence brief where they basically said that there's no actual proof of the safety or the effectiveness of puberty blockers. Now, the problem is that this is medication that's being used off-label, so it means it can be prescribed, but it's off-label, and it's being used on vulnerable young people who really need not chemicalization and castration, but they actually need healing of the mind and getting rid of the confusion that's going on. I mean, just the same as we wouldn't give someone with anorexia nervosa weight loss pills and book them in for a liposuction, we would heal their mind. Same with someone who's got gender dysphoria. Heal the mind and stop chemicalizing them.
Well, if a bloke, the other thing I saw the other day, someone said, well, if a bloke feels like he's feminine, why not give him some bloke hormones to make him more blokey what he was born? Why don't they, if they're going to use them, why don't they use them the other way?
Well, the argument has always been if an adult wants to go down this track, so be it. That's freedom of choice. But we're talking about vulnerable kids here. And under the Bill of Rights, one of the categories that we got from our legal advice, which we've just sent through to Matt Ducey, is around the right not to be subjected to medical or scientific experimentations. Now, the problem is that puberty blockers, which was never intended for gender dysphoria, is an experimentation on young people. And so we've written to Matt Ducey. He's the Associate Minister of Health. This was his kind of little area.
He says it's not. Matt Ducey says not my problem now. Are you aware that that's changed?
Oh, there's a whole lot of ducking and dodging and diving being done by the government on this issue because they really don't want to front up to the radical groups that are pushing the trans issue. They know there's going to be blowback, but, our blowback has got to be stronger. I mean, look, Sean, just in relation to the whole Charlie Kirk thing, there's two things that we have learned over the last week. The first is that there is actually a very, very strong conservative movement that just needs to get a little bit noisier and do a little bit more pushing back. But also we've seen a woeful legacy media, or as Miranda Devine called it, who I interviewed last week from the New York Post, she calls it the hate media. They have just been pushing a narrative that actually is completely false. So you were talking about the little C conservative. I call it, we're just getting back to biology, facts, and truth, and the BFT. So that's the new term for today.
And that there has been a change in the last week since the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death. I feel like another layer or veil has dropped in terms of public awareness of the world that we have lived in for some time.
Yeah, I mean, we held a conference called the Cultural Tipping Point. In hindsight, maybe we should have called it the Cultural Turning Point, because that was the name of Charlie Kirk's organisation. And I think what it's done is it's shown just the visceral actions on the left to anybody who disagrees with what they say. I mean, you've been a victim. Your other hosts on the radio.
Look, I haven't been a victim. Can I just call you out? I've never been a bloody victim. I've been a target.
Yeah.
I've been a survivor, but I've never been a bloody victim, and that's the trick of the stuff.
No, we don't want to call ourselves victims, because that's just laying to their words. No, we just carry on and get up and. But this, this cancel culture has targeted people with our views, but we just got to get some backbone. And I think Charlie Kirk, what he's done is, one of my favourite quotes is that when a brave person takes a stand, it stiffens the spines of others. And I think Charlie Kirk did that. He just gave the ability for people to.
Here's a philosophical question, though, Bob, that I think, and I know that I personally struggle with. Now that the wind appears to be turning, the tide is turning, do we cancel those who cancelled us?
No, clearly no. We should not be guilty or take a hypocritical approach to what we're calling out. Cancel culture has been about destroying the careers, the livelihoods, doxing people that they disagree with. We shouldn't do that. However, I think there's a really important line where people have accused our side of using the same type of cancel culture on people like the Sam Stubbs and the Bomber Bradburys
and the David Farriers
of this world. The difference is that I've always drawn a line in hate speech is that you can express whatever you want, and if you express something dumb, you're entitled to be dumb and wrong and even objectionable. But there is a fine line when it crosses into promoting violence and promoting political violence. Now, the problem is that when you endorse the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or even try to justify it in any way, what you're effectively doing is there is an underlying endorsement of political violence against people that you disagree with. And that's crossing the line, and people need to be called out on that, because violence is never the response to people we disagree with. Debate them, call them out. They may be saying very stupid things like David Farrier and Bomber Bradbury and Sam Stubbs. Call them out. But no, I don't think they should be cancelled. They should be called out. But some people would say, look, there is a problem because they're promoting political violence. And I understand that. I think they are crossing the line when they're endorsing the assassination of someone we disagree with. Sean, you know as well as I do that if someone on the left suffered the same fate, I would not be dancing on their graves. We would not be saying,
that is the thing. Look, you've also done on your social media and your site a really interesting interview. I haven't had time to get to it yet. You have gone back and revisited two people who were at the centre of a very public cancellation. The Falaus, lovely couple, Just remind us of that story and tell us about the interview that you've done with them.